Sharon Tate was born on January 24th, 1943, in Dallas, Texas, to a military family. Growing up, she lived in various places, but it was in the entertainment world that she would eventually find her place. Known for her beauty, grace, and captivating smile, Sharon entered Hollywood with aspirations of becoming an actress. Her early roles were small, but her undeniable charm caught the attention of Hollywood bigwigs. By 1966, she landed a role in Valley of the Dolls, a film that would catapult her to stardom. Sharon wasn't just a pretty face. She was also talented, showing promise as an actress who could captivate audiences with both her looks and her performances. At the height of her career, she was seen as a symbol of innocence and glamour, often cast in roles that reflected her real-life personality. Fans adored her, and she quickly became one of the most beloved stars of the 1960s. In 1968, Sharon married Roman Polanski, the celebrated film director. Their union was the epitome of Hollywood royalty. Together, they seemed like the perfect couple, talented, beautiful, and successful. But there was more to Sharon than her Hollywood image. She was also deeply caring and loved being a wife. In fact, at the time of her death, Sharon was pregnant with the couple's first child, a son. Meanwhile, far from the glamour of Hollywood, a dark and sinister story was unfolding in California. Charles Manson, a failed musician, was forming a dangerous cult called the Manson Family. Manson, with his twisted ideology and manipulative charm, attracted a group of young, impressionable followers. They lived a secluded life in a ranch in the California desert, where Manson controlled them through his delusions and promises of fame and power. Though Sharon's life seemed destined for greatness, Manson's cult was preparing to carry out a plan that would change everything. The paths of these two worlds, one full of promise, the other full of madness, were about to collide in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. Charles Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a teenage mother who was largely absent from his life. From a very young age, Manson's life was marked by instability. His mother was an alcoholic, and Manson was often placed in and out of foster homes. His early years were shaped by neglect, which laid the groundwork for his troubled and criminal future. By the time Manson reached adolescence, he had already developed a deep distrust of society. At 13, he was sent to a reform school for stealing, where he would spend much of his youth in and out of correctional facilities. His time in prison would play a crucial role in shaping his worldview. It was here that Manson learned to manipulate people and started to develop his skills as a charismatic leader. Manson's ambitions were fixated on the music industry, particularly in Los Angeles. He believed he could become a famous musician, and he sought out connections with influential people in the industry. However, despite his efforts, his musical dreams never came to fruition. Manson's frustrations with society and his failed career began to fester, and he turned to alternative methods to make a name for himself. In the late 1960s, Manson gathered a following of young, disillusioned individuals, mostly women, who were seeking purpose and belonging. Manson exploited their vulnerability, offering them an alternative to the societal norms they felt rejected by. He promised them love, freedom, and a way out of their broken lives. Manson's followers, whom he called the Manson Family, were drawn to him because of his charm, persuasive abilities, and the sense of power he projected. Manson's belief system was a twisted amalgamation of different philosophies, including apocalyptic visions, race war theories, and elements of popular culture. He believed in a coming race war, which he called Helter Skelter, inspired by songs from the Beatles' White Album. According to Manson, a violent racial war would erupt, and he and his followers would emerge as the victors, ruling the world after society's collapse. This delusion would ultimately lead Manson and his followers to commit a series of horrific acts. Manson's charm was undeniable, but his mind was filled with paranoia and delusions. He preyed on vulnerable, young people, convincing them that he held the key to understanding the world. His twisted ideology and control over the Manson family would set the stage for one of the most notorious and brutal crimes in history. Charles Manson's obsession with the Hollywood elite began to fester in the late 1960s. As a failed musician, he longed for fame and recognition in the world of entertainment. He believed that by associating himself with the right people, he could break into Hollywood and gain the influence he so desperately desired. However, when his attempts to gain a foothold in the music industry failed, Manson turned to more dangerous means of making his name known. One of Manson's biggest frustrations was his perceived rejection by the Hollywood establishment. He had tried to get his music noticed and had even met with music producer Terry Melcher, who had shown interest in working with him. However, after being turned down by Melcher, Manson's resentment toward Hollywood grew deeper. He began to associate the rich, powerful people of the entertainment industry with the establishment he despised, and this hatred would soon turn deadly. Manson believed that the Tate residence, a luxurious home in the Beverly Hills area, symbolized the very people he loathed: the rich, the famous, and the untouchable. The house was the home of Roman Polanski, a renowned film director, and his wife, Sharon Tate, who was a rising star in Hollywood. Tate was pregnant with their son, and life seemed perfect for the couple. But for Manson, this perfect image represented everything he sought to destroy. Manson also had a bizarre belief system that centered on race and violence, especially his concept of helter-skelter. According to Manson, a race war was imminent, and he believed that the black community would rise up against the white population. Manson saw himself and his followers as the chosen ones, who would emerge as leaders in the post-apocalyptic world. In Manson's twisted worldview, the Tate residence, where the Hollywood elite lived, represented the epitome of his enemies, and Sharon Tate, as a prominent actress, became an unwitting symbol of everything he wanted to destroy. Manson's followers, including Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, were heavily influenced by his manipulative teachings. Manson convinced them that they were on the brink of something great, a new era where they would have power and control over the world. In this delusional state, he gave the orders for them to carry out a violent act that would strike terror into the heart of the Hollywood elite. The Manson family believed that by killing the people in Tate's home, they would spark the race war Manson had been ranting about. It was a horrific and twisted act of violence that would shock the world, linking Manson's delusions to a brutal reality that would forever alter Sharon Tate's life and the lives of many others. The night of August 8, 1969, was supposed to be a peaceful evening for Sharon Tate and her friends. At her home in Benedict Canyon, Sharon, who was 8 months pregnant, spent the evening with her close friends: celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, actress Abigail Folger, her boyfriend Wojciech Frykowski, and a young visitor, Stephen Parent. They gathered together in the beautiful, peaceful surroundings, unaware that their lives were about to be tragically altered. Meanwhile, Charles Manson, the leader of the Manson family, had given orders to his followers to carry out a plan. He believed this act would help set in motion the race war he had been obsessed with for months. The followers were sent to the Tate residence with one mission in mind: creating a scene of chaos and fear that would send shockwaves through the community and the world. Around midnight, Manson's followers, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Tex Watson, arrived at the house. They approached the property with determination, knowing they had been tasked with carrying out Manson's plan. Once inside, they encountered Sharon and her friends, who were unaware of the danger approaching them. Sharon, along with her friends, was taken by surprise. They were gathered in the house, enjoying their evening, when the situation took a tragic turn. In an atmosphere of confusion and terror, Sharon and her friends were taken captive, and the family members carried out their orders. At the end of the evening, the house was left in a state of shock, and messages were left behind in an effort to fulfill Manson's twisted narrative. The brutal acts left the Hollywood community in disbelief, and the police were immediately called to investigate what had happened. The events of that night marked the beginning of a dark chapter in history. Sharon Tate's life, filled with promise and happiness, was tragically cut short, and her name would forever be associated with a moment of violence and fear that left the world reeling. The murders were not only a senseless act of violence, but also a reflection of the madness that had taken hold of Charles Manson and his followers. The shockwaves of the Tate murders were felt worldwide. As the investigation began, authorities were left scrambling for answers. At first, there was no obvious motive, which made the case all the more mysterious and unsettling. The scene at the Tate residence was so chaotic, and the brutality so shocking, that the police initially struggled to make any sense of it. For weeks, detectives were left with few clues. There was no clear connection between Sharon Tate and any known criminals, and the motives behind the murders seemed incomprehensible. While there were some early leads, including the strange messages written in blood on the walls, nothing concrete came forward that could link a suspect to the crime. However, detectives soon learned that there had been another crime, eerily similar in nature, just a few days later. On August 10, 1969, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a middle-aged couple, were also brutally murdered in their Los Angeles home. The message "Helter Skelter" was written on the wall in the LaBianca home, just like at the Tate residence. This raised a red flag for investigators, and they began to see a disturbing pattern. As the investigation deepened, the police discovered connections between the two sets of murders. Some of Manson's followers were quickly identified by their distinct appearance, as they had been spotted by witnesses around the LaBianca crime scene. Additionally, detectives began to look into the so-called Manson Family, a group of young followers living at a ranch in the California desert under Manson's control. In late August, Susan Atkins, one of the key members of the Manson family, was arrested for an unrelated crime. Under questioning, Atkins began to reveal details of the murders, implicating Manson and several others in the killings. This was the breakthrough the police had been waiting for. Soon after, the rest of Manson's followers were arrested. Charles Manson, along with Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, was charged with the murders of Sharon Tate and the others. The arrest of Manson and his followers shocked the nation. It seemed almost impossible that such a charming, charismatic leader could be responsible for orchestrating such brutal violence. But the evidence against them grew stronger as more confessions and testimonies emerged, leading to their eventual trials. The Tate LaBianca murders were no longer a mystery. The Manson family, a group of lost souls, had been manipulated by Manson's delusional beliefs, and their blind obedience to him had led to the murders. The investigation and subsequent arrests marked the beginning of the end for Manson's reign of terror. The trial of Charles Manson and his followers began in 1970, and it quickly became one of the most sensationalized and publicized trials in American history. The courtrooms were packed with media, eager to capture every moment of the case, which had captivated the nation. The horrific nature of the murders, combined with Manson's bizarre behavior, made it an international spectacle. Manson, along with his followers Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, was charged with the murders of Sharon Tate and the others. The prosecution argued that Manson had orchestrated the killings, manipulating his followers into carrying out his violent commands. The defense, on the other hand, claimed that Manson was not directly responsible for the deaths, insisting that the followers acted on their own accord. Manson's courtroom behavior was strange and unsettling. He appeared disinterested in the proceedings, often laughing or making bizarre statements. At one point, Manson even carved an X on his forehead, which he later claimed symbolized his rejection of society. His erratic actions in court only fueled the public's perception of him as a dangerous and unhinged individual. Throughout the trial, Manson's followers were loyal to him, maintaining that they had committed the murders because Manson had told them to. They seemed completely under his spell, believing his delusions about race wars and the coming apocalypse. The prosecution pointed to Manson's control over his followers, showing how he had used manipulation and psychological abuse to convince them to carry out the killings. In 1971, after months of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Manson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten guilty of murder. The prosecution's case was strong, with the testimonies of the Manson family members themselves serving as critical evidence. Manson was sentenced to death, along with his followers. However, the death sentences of Manson and his followers were later commuted to life in prison after California temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. The Manson family's reign of terror had come to an end, but the case continued to haunt the public consciousness for years to come. Manson's ability to manipulate and control others, along with his delusions and chaotic behavior, made him one of the most notorious criminals in history. The trial was not only a pivotal moment in the fight for justice for Sharon Tate and her friends, but it also served as a chilling reminder of the dangers of blind obedience to a charismatic leader. Charles Manson's trial and conviction closed the chapter on one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. The Manson family murders left an indelible mark on American history, shaping the way society viewed cults, manipulation, and the nature of violence. The brutal killings shocked the world, and the story of Charles Manson and his followers became a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind loyalty and the power of charismatic figures. In the years following the murders, the Manson case continued to captivate the public's imagination. Manson's ability to manipulate vulnerable individuals and control their actions without physical force was both chilling and mesmerizing. His influence over his followers highlighted the psychological power a leader could wield over impressionable minds. The Manson family murders became a symbol of the dark side of the 1960s counterculture, showing that even in a time of peace and love, darkness could lurk beneath the surface. For Sharon Tate's family, the impact of the murders was devastating. Sharon's mother, Doris Tate, spent years advocating for justice and raising awareness about the horrors of the Manson family's crimes. Doris worked tirelessly to ensure that Manson and his followers remained incarcerated for life, and her efforts were integral in keeping the memory of Sharon alive. Sharon's sister, Deborah Tate, also became a vocal advocate, fighting for victims' rights and ensuring that her sister's legacy was not forgotten. The murders also had a lasting impact on Hollywood. Sharon Tate had been a rising star, and her brutal death represented the end of a promising career. Her death marked the end of an era in Hollywood, and the tragedy forever altered how the entertainment industry and the public viewed the intersection of fame, violence, and vulnerability. Over the years, the Manson family case continued to generate media attention, with documentaries, books, and films exploring the events of that tragic summer. The fascination with Manson and his followers seemed to only grow, as the public remained intrigued by the psychology behind the murders and the twisted ideology that had led to such horrific violence. The legacy of the Manson family murders is also seen in how society views cults today. The case prompted a greater awareness of the dangers of manipulation and brainwashing, particularly in the context of charismatic leaders who prey on vulnerable individuals. It also led to increased scrutiny of the power dynamics within groups and the importance of recognizing the warning signs of dangerous cult-like behavior. Ultimately, the Manson family murders remain a reminder of the fragility of life, the dangers of unchecked influence, and the importance of remembering those whose lives were taken too soon. Like Sharon Tate, whose legacy of beauty, kindness, and talent continues to be celebrated today, despite the dark chapter of her untimely death. The Manson family murders remain one of the most chilling and tragic events in modern American history. The brutal deaths of Sharon Tate and her friends shocked the world and marked the end of an era in Hollywood, forever altering the perception of fame, innocence, and the dangers lurking beneath the surface of society. Charles Manson's influence over his followers serves as a haunting reminder of the power that a charismatic leader can hold over vulnerable individuals. Manson's ability to manipulate and control people, especially those searching for a sense of belonging, is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. His delusions about race war and his twisted view of society led to a series of murders that not only claimed the lives of innocent people, but also left a dark legacy that would echo through history. For Sharon Tate's family, the pain of losing a daughter, a sister, and a beloved friend is something that can never truly be healed. Yet, through their advocacy and tireless efforts to ensure that the victims were remembered, Sharon's family turned their grief into a force for change. Sharon's legacy lives on in the memory of her beauty, talent, and kindness, and in the many lives she touched during her short time on Earth. The Manson family case also prompted societal change in how we view cults and the dangers of blind obedience to powerful, manipulative figures. In the years since the murders, the case has been studied extensively by psychologists, law enforcement, and sociologists who seek to understand the psychology behind Manson's influence and the tragedy he orchestrated. It serves as a warning about the dangers of charismatic figures who prey on the vulnerable and the importance of being aware of the subtle ways in which people can be manipulated. While Charles Manson and his followers may have been imprisoned for their crimes, the lasting impact of their actions continues to reverberate. The story of Sharon Tate and the Manson family murders will forever be etched in the public consciousness, not just as a tale of horror, but as a reminder of the fragility of life and the need to protect the innocent from those who seek to harm them. As we reflect on this dark chapter in history, we honor the memory of Sharon Tate and all the victims of the Manson family. Their lives were tragically cut short, but their stories remain an integral part of the conversation about the dangers of manipulation, violence, and the human capacity for evil. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the tragic story of Sharon Tate and the Manson family murders. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with others who are fascinated by true crime stories. For more chilling and mysterious cases like this, be sure to subscribe to The Hidden Truth, True Crime Story, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on this case, and let us know which true crime story you'd like us to explore next. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.